This season of Trucksafe Live is presented by LogRock. LogRock builds technology tools to help trucking companies stay compliant with federal and state regulations. LogRock is easier. We connect to multiple systems like your FMCSA account and ELD, so you only have to use one system. LogRock is faster. We automate tedious tasks so you can use your time more effectively. LogRock is smarter. We notify you of issues like expiring or missing documents before they happen, so you can be proactive rather than reactive. Setup is easy, and most of our customers are online shortly after signing up. Request a demo now at logrock.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 24 of Trucksafe Live, the show where we and our guests tackle the hot button issues impacting highway transportation. I'm Brandon with Trucksafe and Childress Law, both of which are dedicated to helping motor carriers develop and maintain cutting-edge safety programs. Excited to talk about trucking regulations today, which is pretty much what we talk about on every show. But today's show is a little bit different. I wanted to spend some time walking through a topic that is always top of mind for most of the fleets we're working with, which is when regulations become problematic, when there is too much regulation or there are regulations that aren't effectively achieving their stated goal. So we published an article on this topic on our website last week and thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about on Trucksafe Live. So that's what we're going to do today. Before we get there, a few things going on at Trucksafe and in the industry. Mentioned this last show. Last show we kind of announced this, but we've got our Trucksafe Boot Camp coming up. You could check out the details on this at trucksafebootcamp.com. This is our in-person 2-day conference that we're going to hold in Orlando, October 12th and 13th, at the Rosen Plaza Hotel. This is a conference that is dedicated to all things DOT compliance, helping fleet safety professionals get up to speed and hands-on with all major aspects of the DOT safety regulations, driver qualification, hours of service, vehicle maintenance, all of that fun stuff. We're really going to dive in deep. And we're going to have, it's not just one of those conferences where you come and listen to people drone on and fall asleep. It's going to be hands-on work. We're going to have some simulations and exercises to work through to really get you hands-on with the DOT compliance issues. So looking forward to that. Again, October 12th and 13th in Orlando. Registration is now open. Spots will fill up soon, so make sure you register before July 1st, and you'll get $100 off with our early bird registration over at trucksafebootcamp.com. Check that out. Also wanted to mention our Trucksafe Fleet Compliance Network. This is our online community for safety professionals to gather together, learn from one another, ask questions, and also get access to all of our DOT-related content, our videos, our detailed articles on breaking regulatory news and other topics. Free to join. Check it out over at trucksafenetwork.com. We've also got an app in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Just search for Trucksafe and you'll find it. Be sure to join, and we look forward to seeing you there. What else do we have going on? Trucksafe. Make sure you check out last episode of Trucksafe Live. We did this a couple of weeks ago. It was an interesting topic, all about telematics devices and some of the top considerations that you should have when you are looking at sourcing a new telematics device to implement in your fleet. We had Rob Carpenter on from Carpenter Compliance. We talked about some of the top considerations when you're looking at ELDs or camera systems or those types of systems, some of the things you should be asking, the questions you should be asking before you roll those systems out. So you can catch that, the replay of that on YouTube. You can also get it wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to do that. Lastly, I'll just mention, make sure you subscribe to our Trucksafe newsletter if you're not already. We're constantly pushing out breaking regulatory news and also our analysis of it. it, you can subscribe over at trucksafe.com/subscribe. All right, so some things going on in the industry this week that are worth mentioning, some of the things that went out on our newsletter. Just this past week or so, the FMCSA came out with its final guidance on property brokerage and so-called dispatch services. So this is a topic we hit on a couple, it was last year. We did a couple of shows on brokerage issues, but this is important guidance that the agency has put out that kind of clarifies certain definitions that are within their regulations when it comes to property brokers, and in particular, who qualifies as a bona fide agent of shippers in terms of determining who needs property broker authority. If I am working on behalf of a particular shipper and I am sourcing trucks or motor carriers to haul goods for that shipper, am I a broker? Do I need property broker authority to do that? The agency is kind of tackling that issue, and in particular, these so-called dispatch services. When do those types of dispatch services need property broker authority? It's been a hot topic for many years. Go look at it. Go look at that guidance. We have an article on it on our website at trucksafe.com. I'm not sure, frankly, that the guidance brings the type of clarity that we were hoping for on that issue specifically. It ends up listing out a multi-factor test, a bunch of different factors that it's not even a test. It's not like, hey, if you meet these factors, you are a property broker and you have to get authority. It's more like, here's a bunch of things you should consider, and if you meet a bunch of these different factors, then maybe it's more likely that you're a property broker and need property broker authority. The one thing that they didn't do in the guidance that I know a lot of people were hoping they would do, but it's not all that surprising to me that they didn't do it, was tackle this issue of double brokerage. Always a hot topic in the industry, double brokerage, and it's something that to this point FMCSA has kind of kept its hands out of. And I think, frankly, nobody's asking my opinion, but frankly, I think rightfully so. I mean, we're talking about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Their job is to deal with safety issues. They are not the agency that regulates the commercial aspects of trucking, which is how I would categorize the topic of double brokerage. Although, there's an argument to be made, I think, that FMCSA should step in. Obviously they haven't found it that compelling. And so in this guidance that just came out, they have once again said that we're not tackling that issue of double brokerage. So we will have to see if it comes in some other form or fashion here in the near future, or not. Probably not, if I had a crystal ball. The last thing I'll mention, kind of industry news here, is another notice that came out from FMCSA this week, which was a notice of proposed rulemaking that would implement, if it's passed, and I have no reason to believe that it won't be enacted. It's a regulation that will implement an operating authority, for-hire operating authority exemption for certain providers of recreational activities. These are going to be companies that are, for example, transporting passengers. They run a company that does like kayaking on a river somewhere, and as part of that business, they have shuttles that transport passengers to one end of the river along with all of the kayaks or the rafts or something like that. Those types of providers, not just in that circumstance, but the point is, the FMCSA is proposing regulations that would provide an exemption to those types of entities from the requirement for interstate for-hire motor carrier operating authority. Why are they doing this? Because Congress came out with a similar statutory exemption for these folks. Somebody lobbied to get this exemption, and it now exists in statutory form in the legislation that governs trucking. And so now FMCSA is stepping in and making the necessary revisions to its regulations to implement that similar exemption. We see this quite a bit with the regulations. And so that was published. Actually, I think it's published either today, or if not today, then tomorrow, I believe. We have a whole article on it on our website if you're interested in learning more about who qualifies as a recreational activity under this exemption. You can check that out over at trucksafe.com. All right. Let's see here. I got some folks commenting on the FMCSA's rulemaking here. Yes, the FMCSA is always as vague as it can possibly be, but it still seems unclear who can and cannot, whether dispatchers can or cannot work with more than one carrier at a time. I agree. I wish it were more clear. I don't know why it has to be so gray, but they left it in that state, so we're going to have to deal with it unless and until they revisit it again. So it is now in final form. All right, so enough about us, enough about what's going on in the industry. Let's move to today's topic. The title of today's show is When Regulations Run Amok. This is, like I said, based on an article that we published on this topic last week over at Trucksafe.com, where we pondered what areas of modern-day trucking regulations have gone too far or are not particularly effective at accomplishing their goals, and what we should do about that when that happens. As we said in the article, trucking is and always has been a heavily regulated industry. That's no surprise, and I think rightfully so. I think most would agree with that. It's dangerous, and the consequences of unsafe operations can be devastating. So it's unsurprising that we have lawmakers and regulators out there that are constantly making tweaks to the regulations. We're seeing this day in and day out, and they are doing that in an effort to minimize the occurrence of large truck and bus crashes. But where exactly do you draw the line? That is the question we posed in the article. That's the question I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to explore that topic even further on today's show and get some other perspectives. So I'm excited to have with me today an industry veteran who's no stranger to the ever-changing regulatory environment in which motor carriers operate, and that's Mike Precia, President and CEO of Fleetworthy. Mike, welcome to the show.
Afternoon, Brandon.
Hey, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. You're in my neck of the woods today, Indianapolis. No,
I did. I drove down from Madison to Indianapolis. I was I wasn't in a commercial vehicle, so I didn't have to check on my hours of service.
Yeah, you got plenty of hours left to drive back home, and you're not performing any recreational activities, so I don't think you get any kind of exemptions.
This is recreational.
Okay,
it's enjoyable. So.
I'll give you that. All right, so for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with you, I was just wondering maybe if we start off with you giving us a little bit of your background and how you ultimately ended up in the trucking world.
Yeah, so I'm the president and CEO of Fleetworthy Solutions. We are a transportation compliance company. We focus on software and services located in Madison, Wisconsin. I've been here about going on 7 years. Joined transportation. I came from a supply chain software background where I had a lot of trucking companies as customers on more of the sourcing side and supply chain side. So it just was a natural fit. So I was excited when I found the opportunity to join Fleetworthy.
So what exactly does Fleetworthy do? We've been fortunate to partner with you guys over the years on various things that we're doing, and we love the product that you offer. But for those who aren't familiar with it, kind of break down what is Fleetworthy.
So we are a company that partners with carriers of all sizes, whether it be private fleets or for-hire fleets, to help them, meet the compliance rules and regulations set forth by the FMCSA and the DOT. And we do that with a combination of technology, a platform that we call CP Suite that, allows our customers to leverage that technology to make sure that their driver community is compliant to all of the regulatory rules and their assets are running legally on the roadways in the U.S. per the regulations as well. And then we also have a second leg of the stool, which is, a pool of subject matter experts that become an extension of their safety departments. We maintain understanding of the rules and regulations. We feel that technology will get you so far, but you also need, people to help you keep an eye on all the changing rules and make sure that you're complying. Most carriers are trying to comply, but the rules are changing so fast, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, it's one of the things that we spend a lot of our time doing is kind of counseling our clients on the ever-changing regulatory landscape. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to really kind of tackle the topic today, which you don't necessarily really see a whole lot of people talking about. I think it's an important topic because, what the last thing we want to do is just kind of follow regulations blindly when it turns out that maybe they're not really accomplishing the goal that they set out to accomplish. So I think it's always good to kind of reflect back on where we are at from a regulatory landscape and ask the hard questions of, are there regulations out there that shouldn't be or that should be tweaked to better accomplish their mission? So I kind of want to, first of all, get your overall take on the state of trucking regulations today. Is it too much, not enough? Are they effective? I know that's a very broad question, but kind of a high level look at the current regulatory landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think, our slogan is beyond compliant. So our goal with our customers is to make sure that they're doing more than just the minimum. We feel if you're just doing the minimum, you're just one accident away from being shut down or a nuclear verdict or, an unsatisfactory performance on an audit and things. So we're always trying to make sure our carriers are going, beyond just the minimum, being proactive. But, with that as a mission, because the bar is always moving, even carriers that are really interested in going beyond the minimum are faced with a paradigm where it's really hard to do that, right? I think the regulations that are put in place are there to make the road safe, but when you step back and look at it from a realistic perspective, it gets kind of hard, right? We tell our customers we're not in the cab. Our platform is, not a device, but the third leg of our stool is understanding that there's this kind of uneven paradigm in trucking. And what I mean by that is if you look at trucks themselves and in the cab and the technology and the thing and how it's growing in regards to uh, the steepness of the curve of technology. And then you go to the safety departments, and their dispersed locations and they're using spreadsheets, green screen, AS400s. They don't even have the ability to consume all the data that's coming out of the cab, yet the government's using that data to decide whether you are compliant or not. So
Yeah.
we're trying to help our carriers find a place by leveraging our technology where we consume that data, we keep track of what's going on from a regulatory perspective, and then create actions and recommendations of how that carrier can be in front of the regulations and build a moat around them from a compliance perspective.
Yeah, it is crazy. Just, you and I were talking earlier. At Trucksafe and our related law firm, we're regularly going in and doing mock DOT audits of motor carriers. And I know you guys do some of that work as well for your clients. And it's just crazy how frequently you go into a motor carrier and they are keeping paper records still of their vehicle files. Is the number one culprit I've found. It's rare almost to see a situation where a motor carrier has digitized their vehicle files. And so you literally open up the filing cabinet, you pull out all of the hanging files, and you're digging through those to try and find an oil change receipt from last year. It's just crazy. And then when you look at that on the driver file side of things, you got so many fleets still on paper driver files. You can imagine how easy it is for things to go wrong when that's your system, right? And I think that's the thing I've really appreciated about your guys' product is bringing it, leveraging technology, like you said, to minimize the instances of those types of gaps.
Absolutely. And, to that example, as you're doing things from a paper-based approach and, you do get audited and you're handing over a paper file that maybe isn't organized correctly, or maybe it has outdated material, you understand that just exacerbates. It's like an onion because
Yeah.
now there are more problems that people can see, which creates more audits, which creates more penalties and things. And that's why our mission is to help carriers move to an electronic platform that they can control, and then layer on top of that alerts and things and work requests and tasks, to get ahead of fixing the problems rather than being reactive.
Yeah, that's one of the things we're routinely preaching to our clients is that organization goes such a long way in a DOT audit. It's probably the single most important thing that you could do to get yourself out of an audit quickly, in our experience, is be organized. If you hand over that vehicle file that's 3 inches thick of documents from 10 years ago that they're not even entitled to see, now you're just inviting them to stay at your place longer and dig through those records and find something, potentially find something that you didn't even have to turn over to them in the first place. So if you can get to a place where you're able to organize your files, get them out of your hair as quickly as possible, get them just what they need and nothing more, I found that is the most effective tool to passing an audit more than anything else, really.
100% agree. That is the narrative that we go through with our customers on a daily basis.
So, kind of in this vein of regulations and how much is too much, from a if we're looking at this from the perspective of the regulators, I guess the question is, how do we strike the right balance between too much regulation and not enough regulation? Because to your point, and I'm in total agreement that the regulations are meant as a floor. If you're not complying with the rules, then you've really got no shot in that. God forbid you got tied up in one of those nuclear verdict cases. But you should be doing a lot more than that. You should be going beyond compliance, as you said. But where do we strike the right balance? Where is the right line to draw for regulations? Are there things that you think regulators should be using as kind of the threshold for that?
Yeah, I think there's so much to that question, and me and my staff are always trying to figure out what the balance. I mean, I look at hours of service, for instance. I mean, when you study hours of service and you apply it to one driver, one truck, it's pretty simple, right? The
Yeah.
rules are pretty simple. But when that one driver becomes 10,000 drivers across 50 states, different time zones, different DOT numbers, but all the same, company. How do even a carrier that's really serious about compliance? How do you keep track of making sure a footprint like that is maintaining compliance, right? And especially when really hours of service, you're always looking kind of reactively. It's after the fact and so on.
Yeah.
So, I think the concept is to make the road safer, but we talked about this earlier. You're putting a timer in a cab that's ticking down, and I think human nature is when you you're running out of time. You don't drive slower, you drive faster, right? You make decisions based on how much time you have left, rather than how am I feeling? Am I fatigued? Am I those things? So I just think it's a hard problem to solve, and I think strict rules based on amount of time in a cab is part of it. But you and I both know it doesn't have anything to do with what that driver was doing before they got in the cab. What if they got into the cab and they were fatigued in the very beginning of their, so you
Yeah.
can
What if
still
they just
be
worked the night shift at Walmart and now
correct,
they're
or
jumping
had
in
a
and driving a truck?
yep, or their baby was up all night, kept them awake all, so, no ill intent meant, but the reality is, I think regulations that are, tracked real time, but looked at retroactively and don't really test the real problem, is how do we fix that?
Yeah, I think
So,
that's definitely one, and we wrote that in our article. That's definitely something I think we should be doing a better job of doing as regulators than what we're doing, which is looking at taking a closer look at retroactively, are our regulations actually accomplishing what we intended them to accomplish? Obviously, anytime the agency is proposing a new rule, they kind of set out the basis for the rule at the start. And here's what we're looking to accomplish. With the hours of service rules have been in effect since the 1930s in some form or fashion. The idea with those is to reduce fatigue driving and eliminate those crashes that are related to fatigue. And so I think at a very basic level, when it comes to drawing the lines with regulations, we have to have mechanisms in place to be able to test our hypothesis.
yep.
Are these regulations actually effective at reducing fatigue driving related accidents or not? And I was disappointed, I think, but not all that surprised to see some recent studies indicating that maybe they are not that great. The hours of service rules, as they are currently structured, are not actually minimizing instances of fatigue-related driving. So, another thing we pointed out in our article are, FMCSA publishes their heavy truck and bus crash data every once in a while. I think the last one was 2020. We were still dealing with 5,000 large truck and bus involved fatalities as of 2020. And from 2010 to 2019, we've seen a 31% increase in these types of fatality accidents involving large trucks and buses. So if the point of the safety regulations is to minimize those, but we are seeing trending in the wrong direction, do you have any thoughts on why that may be and what we need to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on many of those things. I mean, I think that the hours of service rules themselves do not identify whether a person's fatigued. You know, you add to the fact that if you look at trucking as an industry, and an aging driver community, our inability to find younger drivers to enter this as a business. We're pushing our drivers to do more and more. We saw that during COVID. I think all those things are a reason why just hours of service isn't really fixing the problem.
Yeah, and it seems like, even outside of hours of service, it seems like now we have more regulations in place now than we've ever had before, and yet we are still trending in the wrong direction. So I'm always asking myself, what is the genesis of these accidents? If the safety regulations aren't minimizing the instances of those accidents, what is the cause? Is it because the regulations aren't effective? Is it because we've got new technology that is causing bigger problems than what we had hoped? What is it? And I think the point is that we need to have those checks in place, where if we're going to move forward with the regulation, we need to be self-aware. We need to 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, really look at these studies. And if it appears that our regulations are not effective at accomplishing our goal, then we need to do something about it. And we see this occasionally, I think, even in the hours of service context. I think in 2019, FMCSA rolled back some of their hours of service regulations. They expanded the short haul exemption. They kind of changed up how you do split sleeper berth. They made a couple of other things, and their point there was, we're going to try and make the hours of service rules a little more flexible for drivers, was the terminology we kept hearing from FMCSA. So we know that they do this occasionally. I just don't know that they do it to the extent that they really need to do it. If the studies are truly showing that we are not improving, we are not minimizing fatigue-related accidents, then maybe it's time we overhaul the way that we think about drivers' hours of service.
Yeah, and I would add, maybe it's time to take an approach of not just regulating, but maybe rewarding the carriers that are being proactive to help the cause of reducing those accidents. And I use an example, and it sounds like it's off topic, but you're probably not as old as me, but I remember playing football, and when they thought a kid had concussions back in the day, they'd look you in the eye, look at this light, and send you back out in the field, right? And over the years, people realize, well, that's not enough. We've got to do more. And I think being a person that's coached high school football, they move to benchmarking and seeing how a person behaves when they're not concussed, and then having that as a benchmark. And then if that person's injured, you go back to the benchmark and you do some things, some cognitive tests. And if they're performing better, they're not concussed. If their performance is deteriorating, they are concussed. So to me, the more we can get to real-time understanding on how a driver's behavior is changing, whether it's fatigue or anything else, and us rewarding carriers for being proactive, I think goes a lot further in making the road safer than let's slide the hours, let's try to figure out what works for everyone. And it's like there's not a one shoe fits all, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And you can see that you just talked about the change in this recreational type of carrier, things they do or don't have to do. I'm not saying that, are we to believe that in that case, the lives in that business are less important than, someone who's towing some other type of goods? I just don't think that's the case, right? Our goal is to drive safety. And I think proactive steps is better than reactive steps.
Yeah, I think two good points there. One being, and this is something we had in our article too, and I'm fully on board with it, which is this idea that if we have a regulation where we have so many exemptions from that regulation that the exemptions just essentially swallow the rule, what's the point of having the rule? And we see this no more prominently than with hours of service. If anybody wants to pull up Part 395 of the safety regulations now, if you get into Section 395.1 and Point 3, you will see no less than like a dozen different exemptions for people who are completely exempt from hours of service rules. Everything from government-owned vehicles, and to your point, Mike, it's like, those people are just as capable as causing serious accidents as a typical truck driver. Why are we exempting them? We are exempting them because they have lobbyists that have gone out and sought these exemptions, and we've given them to them. But if we have so many exemptions where nobody's subject to these rules, then we're obviously not going to accomplish our purpose of minimizing fatigue driving because everybody's exempt from the rule. So I think that's just another area where we could do better from a regulatory standpoint, is watching out. If we truly believe that a regulation or that a topic is worth regulating, then there should be no reason to exempt people from that regulation. We need to more narrowly tailor it, in my opinion, to fight the issue that we're trying to fight, rather than do a broad sweeping regulation and then have to carve people out here and there. It's just ridiculous.
Completely agree.
And then the other thing you mentioned, which we do nothing of when it comes to trucking regulations, or frankly, hardly any type of regulated body, is incentivizing or rewarding compliance. And it's this classic idea. We've heard FMCSA talk about this over the years, and they use that term beyond compliance, which I think is your guys' tagline. But we've heard them kind of hint at, maybe we will start rewarding carriers that do more, that go above and beyond what the regulations say they have to do, because doing so obviously would incentivize people to do more than what is required of them, and then maybe reduce accidents. But to date, we don't do that. We do not reward motor carriers who do more than what is expected of them. I think we should be doing that for sure. I was going to ask you, I've kind of thought of, I guess we've talked about hours of service. Are there any other particular areas of the regulations where you think we are just getting things wrong when it comes to highway transportation at this point?
I don't know that I would go as far as saying we go wrong, they're doing things wrong. I would just say, you've been talking about, regulatory piece of it, but you layer on top of that nuclear verdicts, attorneys that are suing, carriers because they think they have deep pockets. I think we're creating this scenario where carriers that are trying to do the right thing, a simple example is a carrier that says, hey, we're gonna monitor our drivers' MVRs because we want to make sure that all of our drivers have valid licenses, they're not suspended, they're doing they're drivers we want to be driving with our local trucks. The problem is there's go back to that 10,000 driver carrier who's trying to do the right things, running MVRs, not just annually, but maybe they're monitoring them, real time, but their staff is overworked. And now they have this data that's out there that might be indications of a problem, right? But because they're understaffed, overworked, they're not jumping on those indicators fast enough. And now something happens, and now all these things that they're doing to try to prove that they take compliance serious, it's actually flipped and used against them, because now they can say, oh, look, this one driver, had a problem for X number of months, may or may not have been involved in the accident that triggered this lawsuit. But now all of a sudden there's more indications that, hey, this big bad carrier doesn't care about safety, compliance, and things. And those are some of the things that we're doing with Fleetworthy. We're trying to leverage technology and, give our carriers, another tool that's constantly looking at all these different data sources and giving them actions and directions of, these are actions that you need to take so that you can continue to show that you're serious about compliance.
Yeah. I think that's something that most carriers that I work with, at least, don't appreciate, which is how those types of nuclear verdict cases play out. And we've done some other shows with like Steve Bryan from Blue Wire and a couple of others where we've kind of talked about those types of cases, and they always become about the motor carrier's reputation. As you said, Mike, it becomes the circumstances of the accident at hand become insignificant in the case. The case becomes about, well, what's this motor carrier's CSA scores, and what are its out of service rates? Look how unsafe it is. How can we allow this motor carrier to continue to operate when it's got such bad safety scores? And that is the story that's told to jurors, and that is persuasive to jurors, it turns out.
Yep.
And so, it inflames them and gets them mad and makes them want to do something. And the tool that they have available to them is to punish the motor carriers, usually with some type of punitive damages. Those damages are intended to punish you for your bad behavior, which is, in most cases, a lot of cases, your non-compliance with these things. So if we have platforms out there like Fleetworthy where you can really use it to show that you are doing more than what the regulations require and you are
Yep.
complying with the regulations, that is just building up your reputation in those types of cases.
Yeah, Blue Wire is a classic example. I'm on Steve's board of directors, so the mission that they have there is a great one, and really kind of combines with our vision of what we're trying to do with our customers and in the industry. Um, but as you know, it's just not an easy it's not an
Yeah.
easy task.
Yeah, you mentioned continuous license monitoring. I want to get your thoughts on that because I know we've preached that message over and over again of how much we think motor carriers should be voluntarily subscribing to a continuous license monitoring service. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we agree. And again, the only caveat, and we partner with the leaders in continuous MVR monitoring because we think that's a huge aspect of running a compliant carrier. The thing that we say, going back to that, going beyond beyond compliant, is just make sure that data that is that MVR that you're monitoring, it becomes this data source, but it doesn't necessarily it's not a destination for your safety team. So we consume that information and then, like I said, layer on top of that action so that the moment we see that a driver has an issue, we're notifying the safety department of our customer, saying, okay, here's what you said you would do in these situations. Make sure that that's done by this amount of time so that you can fix that risk
Yeah.
quickly, because the longer it festers and stays there, the bigger the risk is, right? So it's not
Yeah.
just enough to monitor it. You have to do something about it.
Yeah, because I think that is one of the biggest gaps. Speaking about regulations going awry, I think that's one of the biggest current gaps where I think we actually probably need more additional regulations, which is this concept of annual MVRs. So
Mm-hmm.
regulations, for folks watching, probably know that the regulations only require of you that once you hire a driver that you check their motor vehicle record once per year. But those are just snapshots in time that
Correct.
tell you, does this driver have a license as of the day I run this? If John Doe loses his license tomorrow after you ran the report because he didn't pay child support or didn't appear for a court date, you're going to be blind to that unless he tells you, or until a year later when you run his next MVR. So you got potentially a year's worth of time where you've got John Doe out there driving a large truck or bus without a license. And that's not theoretical. We see that happen, catch carriers so many times in that violation, and that's what the DOT considers a red flag violation, is using a driver that doesn't have the proper license to operate their equipment. It's a huge deal, and you can imagine how that plays to a jury if that driver then goes and kills somebody and he doesn't have a license. So
Absolutely.
of all the things, the technologies that are coming out for trucking companies nowadays, I think and continuous license monitoring was early, but I think it is one of the most effective things that you can do, single most effective things that you can do beyond compliance right now to protect your fleet.
Yep.
Just
Agreed.
my 2 cents on that. The other area I wanted to ask you about that I think not enough fleets pay attention to is kind of training, continuous training. The thing about the regulations is they say very little about training. They just basically say, hey, you motor carrier have an obligation to make sure your drivers are well informed about their obligations and their regulations. And that's all they say, except in limited circumstances, hazmat employees and stuff like that. There's no specific mandated training. What are your thoughts, or what are your recommendations to your customers in terms of what training they provide to their drivers, and then also to their safety staff, generally speaking?
Yeah. So you've kind of, so we are not a training platform, but what we do is we go try to find the best of breed vendors that we can partner with. We built our product to be agnostic in nature, and we can integrate these kind of ancillary safety type products in our solution, and then we can red thread the behaviors that we're trying to help our customers foster with their drivers. So it's number one, you want to make sure that it's has a library that is broad enough to really deal with the day-to-day issues that your drivers are going to be faced with. But you also have to be monitoring those situations. Like, it's great to have training available to drivers, but if you're not monitoring, incidents, and what are the incidents and what are the trends, so that you can red thread that to the right type of educations and classes, then it's kind of hard to accomplish. So what we do is we partner with great, both platforms or consultants like you good folks, and because we're doing a 360-degree view of how a driver's behavior is impacting compliance, the moment we see, events, whether it's, you know, swerving or, near misses or things like that, we want to get that data connected to the right type of, class or education, and make sure that that's getting to the driver. But then even more importantly, making sure that you're monitoring, did the driver take the test?
Yeah.
Did they pass the test? Did their behavior improve after they took the test? Do they need to take the test again? Should there be driver, situations where the driver should be managing or doing something with the driver? And then documenting all of that, so that if an accident does occur, you have all the data that shows, hey, this was just an accident, because we are doing all the things necessary to drive compliance and make sure we do our part to make the road safer.
Yeah. I think it's key, and you've said it a few times now, but I think people really need to take it away that, you can have all of the data, access to all of the data out there, but if you're not effectively managing that data, then it's just going to come back to work against you. Like, we worked with a client a couple of years ago now. We went down and did a mock DOT audit, and we looked at their telematics system that they were using. They were using it primarily as an ELD device, but it also was capturing harsh braking events and stuff like that. And what they didn't realize was that the system was actually giving all of their drivers, I think they had a couple thousand drivers, it was giving them a score of, A, B, C, D, E, F, based on their driving activity, their harsh braking, stuff like that. And so they had drivers in the system who they were continuing to use who had been graded an F, and they didn't even know it. And so you can imagine, we told them at the time, we got to get control of that. We either have to turn that functionality off, which I'm hesitant to say for other reasons, but more importantly, we need to figure out a way to manage that and actually act upon that data that we are getting in. Because if that driver then goes and kills somebody, and now you're in litigation, and it comes out that you had a system telling you the driver had a problem with their driving behavior, and you didn't do anything about it, that plays terribly to a jury. So you got to understand, I think, first is your point, Mike, that you got to understand what data is coming into you, and then you need to have a plan to be able to manage it.
Completely agree. And, we have a thesis that, driver scorecarding, which is, has, been popular and then lost momentum and then popular. We think, and there's a lot of different ways you can get these driver scorecards. And, I feel that they're going to go the way of credit scores. It used to be,
Yeah.
I thought TransUnion's credit score was the best, and someone thought Experian's was the best. But now, if you look at it, platforms are showing you all of the credit
Yeah.
scores. You choose which one. Now you've got a kind of a blended, credit score. Well, we're trying to do that with driver score. We welcome partnering with people that have scores of their own based on maybe this slice of data, and we want to weave that data with all the data that we're consuming from different data sources, and then have a real, what we will hopefully be, a really clear driver scorecard based on a lot of different KPIs, rather than just individual ones that give you a better picture of how well is this carrier educating their drivers, managing and maintaining compliance and things. And I think that comes from a lot of different data sources, not just ELDs, not just MVRs, but a lot of different things.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're running out of time, Mike. I just wanted to leave with one additional question, which is, what do you think is going to be the next big regulatory push in our industry? We've got some hints from FMCSA about what they're thinking about, speed limiters, stuff like that. Do you see anything coming down the pike here that fleets need to watch out for?
You can imagine we look at a lot of different things. I feel like the push for, moving away from fossil fuels to electric vehicles to things there. I think a lot of things that's going to catalyze a lot of changes, right?
Yeah.
The first one's easy. It's like, okay, fuel tax, how does that change if they're not, if they're not filling up with gas, then what are we going to calculate? Is it going to be just miles? Is it, so I think that's interesting. And I do think, whether we go partially autonomous, I don't think full autonomous vehicles are going to be here anytime soon, but I think, how does that affect hours of service rules if we're leveraging technology for, not fully autonomous vehicles, but vehicles that are doing some of the things itself? Does that mean that hours of service rules should change because now we're not wholly dependent on the driver? So I think that's interesting.
I saw one of the things FMCSA was questioning to that point was, as I understand it, in some levels of autonomy, there are going to necessarily be folks back at an office kind of monitoring things and also dealing with law enforcement if the truck gets stopped, and whether those people who are sitting in an office somewhere need to be subject to some kind of hours of service regulations.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So I think that. And then the other one is, as you've seen changes in regards to what's the minimum age for a driver. Discussions about that. I think as that comes more and more into fruition, I think that's going to naturally change some regulatory rules. Right?
We'll see. I think the last I heard is just abysmal. The numbers on that Safe Driver Apprenticeship pilot program that is allowing limited number of 18 to 20-year-olds to operate trucks. I think they were hoping to get 3,000 participating drivers. I think the last numbers I saw, there were like literally 3 people participating in that program. So just no, it doesn't seem like there's much interest in that program. And I think there are a variety of reasons for it, including some red tape with that program. But yeah, I think that's something we'll have to watch closely, is whether we start to see that age limit of 21 creep down a little bit. All right, Mike, we're out of time. Really appreciate you joining me today again. Great discussion. If people want to learn more about Fleetworthy or reach out, how do they do it?
They can reach us at www.fleetworthy.com. A lot of information on our website, so feel free to visit our website and see if there's anything we can do for y'all.
Excellent. Thanks again, Mike. Really appreciate it. All right, we're going to wrap the show up. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Be sure to stay tuned for announcements about our future shows. We're going to try and do these every couple of weeks or so. You can catch the replays of these if you miss them live, wherever you get your podcast or over at trucksafelive.com. I want to mention our courses, our online courses. We have courses available for safety managers and also drivers. We've got hazmat training, reasonable suspicion training. If you want an online solution for that, check out our courses over at trucksafeacademy.com. Be sure to follow us on social media. And like I said at the start, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest transportation news and analysis. Thanks again to the sponsor for this season of Trucksafe Live, LogRock. Really appreciate you teaming up with us on this. That's it. Hope to see you guys later. Thanks for joining us.